Sometime in the 17th century, Antoine van Leeuwenhoek looked through a microscope of his own design and he saw little creatures cavorting around. He called them animalcules. He never connected this to disease. That, of course, could come much later with Louis Pasteur, who identified those little animalcules as bacteria and connect them to disease. However, in between Leeuwenhoek and Pasteur, there was a very interesting observation made by Jon Snow. Dr. Snow was physician to Queen Victoria, and he was very interested in infectious diseases, although, of course, in those days they didn't call them infectious diseases. They didn't know what caused disease. Cholera was his target for observation. And cholera is a terrible disease. Today, of course, we know it's a bacterial disease. They didn't know it back then. It just ravages your intestine. And he was keen on finding out just what was going on. And he had an idea. He thought that somehow there was something in the environment that was causing this disease. Now, that was a rather novel kind of a notion because up to that time, people thought that most illnesses were caused by what they called miasmas, or bad air. That notion had been hatched by Hippocrates. And that was an interesting idea that Hippocrates had because before Hippocrates, the ancient Greeks thought that if there was some calamity, it was due to having displeased the gods in some way. Hippocrates said, no, there are real life causes of disease. And he thought that bad air from rotting garbage was one of these. So this idea of invisible substances causing disease was already around, and Jon Snow had an idea that he'd be able to find out just what is going on here. So he looked at London, and he saw that cholera was rampant in some parts of London and not in others. So he took a map of the city of London, and he started to pinpoint the homes where cholera had been identified. And interestingly enough, when he looked closely at the map, he saw that there was a pump on Broad Street. And most of the houses where cholera had caused disease were around that pump. And he suggested to the mayor of London, remove the handle of the pump and you will cure cholera. Well, they did remove the handle and cholera incidence went down. Of course, they didn't know really what was causing it. It wasn't until much later that this turned out to be bacteria. But he wrote a classic treatise on this, Jon Snow did, on cholera. And he really was the father of epidemiology, of trying to trace how diseases come about. And today, of course, we know a great deal about bacteria. We know a great deal about viruses. Unfortunately, we are very much focused on viruses today. And in the old days, as I said, they thought that disease was caused by miasmas, bad air. In fact, the disease we call malaria comes from the old Latin word meaning bad air. Mal, bad, area, air. And actually, of course, it isn't transmitted by bad air, but there's sort of an air connection because it's transmitted by mosquitoes, a parasite that they inject into people. So it kind of comes from the air. But today, of course, we know all about microbes, we know all about bacteria, we know all about viruses. And that original notion of miasma is not totally wrong, is it? Because we look around, we don't see these viruses in the air, they're invisible. It is kind of a miasma. And today, of course, we know what to do about that. We put on our masks and hopefully keep those invisible little particles at bay.